My name is Adeline Hernandez. I'm 34 years old, and I learned the hard way that grief doesn't just break your heart, it can blind you long enough for someone else to quietly rewrite your life. Even now, thinking about what my older sister did makes my hands tremble. Not with rage anymore, but with disbelief, with the audacity of it, with how easily I trusted her when I was at my weakest. This story officially began about 8 months ago, but the roots stretch much further back to the night 3 years earlier when our parents were killed in a car accident. One moment they were driving home from dinner, the next, they were gone. No goodbyes, no final words, just silence where a future was supposed to be. Overnight, it was just the two of us left, me and my sister Danielle Hernandez. Growing up, Danielle was always the golden child, the responsible one, the achiever, the one teachers praised and relatives bragged about. She went to a respected university, built a polished career, married well. I was different. I took longer to figure things out. Community college, 2 jobs, a lot of surviving instead of planning. Our parents loved us both. I know that now, but it never felt equal when we were kids. Danielle shone. I blended into the background. After Mom and Dad died, I thought foolishly that maybe grief would level us, that losing them would finally make us meet in the middle. I was wrong. The lake house was everything to our family. It wasn't just property, it was memory solidified into wood and stone. Dad built most of it himself over 15 years, starting when I was still in elementary school. 4 acres of waterfront land, tucked between tall pine trees, about 2 hours north of the city. Summers there were sacred. Dad woke us before sunrise to fish. Mom cooked massive breakfasts on the screened porch. For a few weeks every year, life felt uncomplicated, safe. The house wasn't huge, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a wraparound deck. Dad carved by hand, but every inch of it carried them. Mom chose the furniture, the dishes, the paintings. Dad's fishing gear lived in the shed. Grandma's quilt draped the couch. It was their sanctuary. Then it became ours. When they died, everything became overwhelming. Medical bills from Mom's cancer treatments, legal paperwork, probate court. I could barely get out of bed most days, let alone understand legal language. Danielle stepped in immediately. She told me she'd handle everything. She was organized, confident, calm, and I was shattered. "I've got this," she said. "You don't need to worry." I believed her. That was my first mistake. For months, she dealt with lawyers and accountants. I received short texts. "Things are moving. There are complications. I'll explain later." I signed documents when she told me to. Showed up to meetings when she insisted. I wasn't really there. I was moving through grief like a ghost. 6 months after the funeral, Danielle called and said everything was settled. The lake house, she explained, had been placed into a family trust. Mom and Dad wanted it preserved, protected, kept in the family. Danielle would manage it since she understood this stuff and we'd share access. It sounded logical. It sounded responsible. It sounded like something an older sister would do to protect both of us. She even suggested a schedule so we wouldn't overlap. At the time, I was barely surviving, so I agreed. I told her I'd probably start going up again in the spring when the pain wasn't so raw. That first year, I only went twice. Alone. I walked. The property sat on the deck, cried until my chest hurt. The house still smelled like Mom's lavender sachets. Dad's tools were right where he'd left them. Those visits were brutal but necessary. Danielle, meanwhile, went constantly with her husband and their kids. Social media filled with photos of barbecues, swimming sunsets from our deck. I told myself I was glad the house was being used. But somewhere deep inside, something ached, like I was being slowly written out of my own story. By the time I felt stable enough to re-enter life, a promotion at work, a better apartment, a steady relationship with my boyfriend Marcus, I didn't realize how much had already been taken from me. And I had no idea that the trust I'd been leaning on didn't exist at all. By early summer, I finally felt steady enough to reclaim pieces of my life that grief had put on hold. Work was going well. Marcus had gently pulled me back into the world, and for the first time since my parents died, the thought of the lake house didn't feel like a knife to the chest. It felt like something I could face, something I deserved to return to. I called Danielle in June and told her I wanted to spend the 4th of July week at the lake house. There was a pause on the line long enough that I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Oh," she finally said, "we already planned to be there that week. The kids are really excited." I suggested we overlap, just a few days. I told her it might be nice to be there together again like when we were younger. She shut that down immediately. The house wasn't big enough, she said. It would be cramped, uncomfortable. Wouldn't it be better to stick to the schedule? I didn't argue. I told her it was fine. She sounded relieved and suggested mid-August instead. That should be perfect. Mid-August came and I drove north on a Friday afternoon with my car packed full groceries, books, and a new fishing rod I'd bought to honor Dad. The closer I got, the lighter I felt. I didn't realize yet that I was driving straight into something that would permanently change how I saw my sister. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. The house looked wrong. There was a large trampoline in the side yard, the kind with tall safety nets. Children's bikes lay scattered across the lawn. The porch furniture was unfamiliar, cheaper plastic, nothing like what Mom had chosen. Through the front windows, I could see the living room had been rearranged. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, heart pounding, trying to convince myself this was normal. Houses changed. Life moved on. I called Danielle. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I texted, "I'm here. There are some changes. Can you explain?" 3 hours later, she replied, "Oh yeah, we've been fixing the place up. It needed updates. Looks good, right?" Inside, the changes were worse. Mom's furniture was gone, replaced with generic modern pieces. The warm cream walls she loved were painted stark gray. Dad's fish mounts were missing. Grandma's quilt was nowhere to be seen. In my parents' bedroom, their bedroom toys were scattered everywhere. The bed replaced the bathroom fixtures changed. The kitchen had been partially remodeled, and Mom's vintage stove was gone. I stood there shaking, surrounded by a house that still stood in the same place, but no longer felt like it belonged to my parents or to me. I called Danielle again. This time she answered. "What happened to the house?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. She sighed, that familiar, dismissive older sister sigh I'd heard my entire life. "Adeline, it needed work. It was stuck in the past. Marcus and I mean we invested our own money to make it functional for the kids. You should be thanking us." I asked about Mom's furniture, Dad's fish, Grandma's quilt. She said most of it had been donated because it was old. The fish mounts were creepy. The quilt was probably in storage somewhere. Something cracked inside my chest. These weren't just things I said. They were Mom and Dad. She brushed it off. "If you want to contribute to upkeep, we can talk. But we've been paying the taxes, maintaining the place, actually using it." When I asked what she meant by paying property taxes, she said they came from the trust, but that they'd put in far more than it covered. The conversation left me unsettled in a way I couldn't shake. Over the next months, every visit revealed new changes. A fire pit, a shed, more furniture replaced. Damage started appearing too. Scratches in the deck, stains on the couch, scuffed floors. When I mentioned it, Danielle got defensive. "Houses get wear and tear. We're actually living here, not preserving it like a museum." By fall, something inside me shifted. I wasn't grieving anymore, I was being erased. And I finally realized that whatever trust Danielle kept referring to was the one thing she had never actually given me the truth. By the time autumn settled in, the unease I'd been carrying stopped feeling abstract and started pressing down on me in a very specific way. Every time I thought about the lake house, my chest tightened, not with grief anymore, but with suspicion. Something wasn't lining up. And the more I replayed my conversations with Danielle, the clearer it became that she was giving me just enough information to keep me quiet, never enough to make me informed. I started asking questions. At first, I kept them casual. I asked how the trust was structured, who the trustee technically was, whether there were reports or statements I could look at just to understand how expenses were being handled. Each time Danielle deflected. She said the documents were with her office files. She said it was complicated. She said I didn't need to worry about that stuff, that she was handling it. That phrase started to bother me. Handling it. Like I was a burden she'd graciously taken off everyone's hands. When I asked for copies of the trust paperwork, she told me she'd send them when she had time. Weeks passed. Nothing arrived. I followed up. She said she'd been busy. I followed up again. She said I was stressing over nothing. Marcus noticed before I fully admitted it to myself. One night, sitting on the couch in my apartment, I vented about yet another vague answer Danielle had given me. Marcus listened quietly, then said, "Adeline, I don't want to put ideas in your head, but have you actually seen this trust?" I told him no, that Danielle said it existed, that she was a lawyer-adjacent professional, that she wouldn't lie about something like that. Marcus didn't argue, he just asked, "Then why won't she show it to you?" That question followed me everywhere. I went back to the lake house twice more before winter. Each time, there were more changes, more signs that Danielle and her family had settled in permanently. It felt like I was stepping into someone else's life every time I opened the door. I noticed more damage too. Scratches along the deck railings, water stains on the hardwood floors, the couch sagging in places it never had before. When I mentioned the damage, Danielle snapped. You can't expect a house to stay pristine when it's actually being used. Used by them, not by us. I realized something chilling during that visit. I felt like I needed permission to be there. I caught myself asking before touching things, cleaning up after them, apologizing when I took up space. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about control. By late fall, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I told Danielle I needed to see the trust documents. Not eventually, not someday, now. She sighed heavily over the phone. Why are you making this a thing? Everything is being handled properly. That's not an answer, I said. There was a pause. A sharp one this time. Adeline, she said slowly. You're getting emotional. This is legal stuff. You wouldn't understand it anyway. That sentence hit me harder than anything else she'd said. It wasn't just dismissive, it was familiar. It was the voice she'd used our entire childhood whenever I dared to question her authority. And suddenly I understood something that made my stomach turn. She didn't see me as an equal owner. She saw me as someone to manage. That night, Marcus sat with me at my kitchen table while I scrolled through old emails, bank statements, and court notices I'd ignored during the worst of my grief. He didn't push, he didn't accuse. He just said, if everything's above board checking, won't change anything. But if it's not, you deserve to know. The next morning, I took a day off work. I drove to the probate court. I told myself I was just going to look, just to reassure myself that Danielle was right and I was overthinking things, that the trust was real and this feeling would finally go away. I had no idea that within an hour, my entire understanding of the past 3 years would collapse. The probate office was quiet in the way government buildings always are, fluorescent lights humming softly. Papers, shuffling voices kept low and impersonal. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so life-altering could happen in a room that felt so ordinary. I filled out a request form, my hands steady despite the storm building in my chest. I told myself again and again that this was just a formality, that I would find exactly what Danielle had described, walk out embarrassed for doubting her, and maybe even apologize for pressing so hard. The clerk returned with a thin stack of documents. Thin. I flipped through them once fast, scanning for familiar words. Trust. Trustee. Family trust. Nothing. My heart began to pound. I slowed down, forcing myself to read carefully. Deed. Final settlement. Ownership distribution. And there it was in black and white. The lake house was left to Danielle Hernandez and Adeline Hernandez 50-50. No trust, no special authority, no managing role. We were equal owners. We always had been. I sat there staring at those pages, reading the same lines over and over as if they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating if I looked long enough. My hands started to shake, not from grief, from betrayal. Danielle had lied to me for nearly 3 years. She hadn't just misrepresented details or simplified things. She had fabricated an entire legal structure to position herself as the sole decision-maker. She'd let me believe I had less power than I did, less right, less voice, while she remodeled our parents' house into her personal vacation home. I drove home in a fog and spread the documents across my kitchen table. I read them again and again. Each time the truth became more inescapable. Every time she told me when I could visit, every time she dismissed my questions, every renovation, every dollar spent. All of it had been done without my consent. I felt sick, angry, humiliated. But beneath all of that, something else was forming, something colder and steadier than any emotion I'd felt since my parents died. Clarity. I didn't call Danielle. Not that day, not the next. I knew if I confronted her immediately, I'd explode and she'd talk circles around me like she always had. Instead, I did something she never expected. I started documenting everything. In early spring, I called her and asked if I could use the lake house for a weekend in May. I was calm, friendly. I didn't mention probate records or lies or ownership. She agreed easily, probably relieved that I'd stopped making things complicated. That weekend, I didn't grieve. I didn't reminisce. I documented. I photographed every room, every piece of furniture that had been replaced, every scratch on the deck, every stain on the couch, every gouge in the railing my father had carved by hand. I went through drawers and closets, finding remnants of my parents' lives shoved out of sight. In the back of the master bedroom closet, I found a box. Inside were pieces of Mom's jewelry, a few of Dad's watches, things Danielle had decided weren't worth displaying, but also hadn't been thrown away. I took the box with me when I left. They were mine as much as hers. Over the next weeks, I met with my own attorney. She reviewed everything: the deed, the photos, the financial records showing estate funds being used for renovations. When she looked up at me, her expression was firm. "You're in a very strong position," she said. "You have the right to the property, and you have the right to force a sale if you and your sister can't agree." Force a sale. The phrase echoed in my mind long after I left her office. The house was worth a lot. Waterfront property always was. My attorney estimated it could sell for well over $600,000. My half would be life-changing. But this wasn't about money. It was about Danielle deciding I didn't matter. And I realized something then, sitting alone with those documents spread out like evidence of a crime. I wasn't asking for fairness anymore. I was done waiting for permission. Once I understood exactly what Danielle had done, I stopped reacting and started observing. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse her. I didn't even hint that I knew the truth. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I played along. I let her believe the lie was still working, that I was still the grieving younger sister who didn't understand the legal world she'd so expertly constructed around me. In late July, I called her and asked if I could come up to the lake house for a weekend. There was a brief hesitation, then warmth. "Actually, that's perfect," she said. "We'll be there too. It'll be nice for everyone to spend time together." Everyone. She said it like I was part of the group, like I hadn't spent years being sidelined in my own family story. When I arrived that Saturday morning, the house was alive with noise, children laughing, music playing. A golden retriever burst out the front door and jumped on me, muddy paws smearing my shirt. Danielle appeared behind him, beer in hand, smiling easily. "Sorry," she laughed. "He's excited." Inside, the air conditioning was blasting another upgrade I hadn't been told about. Danielle's husband barely acknowledged me. Her kids ran past dripping water onto the hardwood floors. No one wiped it up. No one cared. I watched, I remembered. Throughout the day, the damage mounted. The dog clawed at the couch. A soda spilled and soaked into the cushions. A metal toy scraped across the deck railing my father had carved. Danielle laughed it off every time. "It's a lake house," she said. "Things get messy." By dinner, we were sitting on the deck watching the sunset paint the water gold. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful until Danielle leaned back in her chair and said something that made everything inside me lock into place. "You know," she said, "I'm really glad we took charge of this place. After Mom and Dad died, it felt like a tomb. All their old stuff everywhere. Now it's a home again. A future." I asked her carefully whether she thought Mom and Dad would have wanted their furniture donated, their personal things erased. She frowned. "You're being sentimental. At some point you have to let go." That was it. That was how she justified everything. Later, when I finally asked about the trust, asked her to explain it, she shut down. Told me I didn't need to worry. Told me I was being dramatic. So I stopped pretending. "There is no trust," I said quietly. I checked the probate records. The deck went silent. Danielle's face flushed. She accused me of spying, of being ungrateful, of not being there when things needed to be handled. "You were too busy falling apart," she snapped. Someone had to take control. And in that moment, the truth surfaced fully. This had never been about responsibility. It had been about power. I stood up steady and calm in a way I'd never felt around her before. "I want to sell the house," I said. Her shock was immediate. Her anger followed. "You can't," she said. "This is family property." "I'm a co-owner," I replied, "and I'm done being managed." The words landed like a verdict. And for the first time in her life, my sister realized she was about to lose something she thought she owned outright. Danielle didn't yell right away. That surprised me. At first, she just stared at me like I'd spoken in a language she didn't understand. Her mouth slightly open, eyes darting, as if she was waiting for someone to jump in and correct me. For most of her life, someone always had. "You're not serious," she finally said, laughing under her breath. "You're emotional. This weekend has been a lot." "I'm not emotional," I replied. "I'm informed." That's when the anger hit. Sharp, immediate. She accused me of tearing the family apart, of punishing her children, of being jealous of her life, her marriage, her stability. She said I was doing this out of spite because I'd never built anything of my own. Every word was carefully chosen to land where she knew it would hurt. But it didn't, because for the first time, I wasn't standing in front of her as the little sister asking to be taken seriously. I was standing there as an equal owner who finally understood her rights. "I'm not asking anymore," I said. "I'm informing you. I'm forcing a sale unless you buy me out at fair market value." Her husband stepped in then, voice tight, asking if we could talk about this later. Danielle shook her head. No, she thinks she can blow up our lives and just walk away. I think you blew it up 3 years ago, I said calmly. I'm just cleaning up the aftermath. Within days, the calls started. Cousins, an aunt, a family friend I barely remembered. Danielle had gotten ahead of the story, painting herself as the protector of our parents' legacy, and me as the bitter sister trying to cash out. I told the truth to anyone who would listen. Some believed me, some didn't. The legal process moved faster than I expected. My attorney filed the partition action, and Danielle was served at work. She called me within an hour, voice shaking with fury. You sued me, she hissed. Your own sister. I exercised my legal rights, I said. You taught me how important those are. The court date loomed. Danielle tried everything. Mediation requests, emotional appeals, legal maneuvers, but the facts were undeniable. She had acted unilaterally. She had lied. And the judge made it clear that sentiment didn't override law. Unless Danielle could buy me out, the house would be sold. 30 days. That was all she had. When the ruling came down, I watched her face drain of color. For the first time, control slipped through her fingers. And as much as I told myself this wasn't about revenge, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a quiet sense of justice settle in my chest. Because standing up for myself didn't feel cruel. It felt overdue. The 30 days that followed the court ruling were some of the longest of my life. Danielle didn't speak to me at first. Not directly. Instead, I heard about her through everyone else. Relatives called with updates they pretended were casual. She's not sleeping. The kids are confused. She's talking to banks. Every conversation carried the same underlying message. Are you really going to go through with this? Yes, I was. Behind the scenes, everything accelerated. My attorney confirmed what I already suspected. Danielle didn't have the liquidity to buy me out. The mortgage on her primary home, the loans, the lifestyle she'd built, while assuming the lake house was untouchable. None of it left room for a sudden six-figure payout. Still, she tried. She applied for loans. She asked for extensions. Her lawyer sent formal letters arguing hardship, claiming she deserved a larger share because of the improvements she'd made. Each argument collapsed under scrutiny. Renovations done without consent didn't entitle her to more ownership. Emotional attachment didn't change the deed. When that avenue failed, she changed tactics. One night, she called me directly. Not angry, not defensive, quiet. I messed up, she said. I know that now. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I thought I was doing the right thing, she continued. Managing everything, making decisions. I convinced myself you didn't want to deal with it. You never asked, I replied. I know, she whispered, and I should have. It was the first honest sentence she'd spoken in years. She admitted the truth then, that she'd wanted control. That after our parents died, the house felt like the last thing she could claim as proof she was responsible, capable, indispensable. She'd told herself she was protecting it, protecting us. But really, she'd been protecting her image. I don't want to lose the house, she said finally. Not for me, for the kids. That was the moment that tested me. Because as angry as I still was, I believed her when she said that part. Her children loved that place. They'd grown up there in ways I never would again. They hadn't asked to be part of this. I told her the truth, that I already had a cash offer, that the sale could happen fast, that she still had one option left to find private financing and buy me out at a reduced amount, one last chance to keep the house. 2 weeks. That was what I gave her. If she couldn't do it, I would accept the offer and walk away completely. When we hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after years underwater. 13 days later, my attorney called. Danielle did it, she said. Her in-laws are loaning her the money. It's legitimate. Paperwork checks out. I sat down slowly, phone pressed to my ear. She'd done it. Not because she outmaneuvered me, but because she finally had to face consequences and ask for help. And now the decision was no longer about leverage. It was about what kind of ending I was willing to live with. The closing happened on a gray Tuesday morning. The kind of quiet, colorless day that feels strangely appropriate when something ends for good. We met at a title company halfway between where Danielle and I lived, neutral ground, for a family that no longer knew how to share anything without it becoming a battleground. There were no raised voices, no speeches, just paperwork, signatures, initials in blue ink where lives intersected and then separated. Danielle's in-laws sat stiffly at the end of the table, the certified check resting in a folder between us, like a physical embodiment of everything we'd been fighting over. When it was done, When the documents were notarized and the check was placed into my hands, the title representative explained formally, clinically, that I no longer had any ownership interest in the lake house. Danielle was now the sole owner. Did I understand? I said yes. Danielle stood and offered her hand. It felt surreal to shake at this woman who had once been my protector, my rival, my manipulator, my sister. Her grip was firm but uncertain, her eyes glossy with something that looked like shame. Take care of it, I said quietly. Honor Mom and Dad in whatever way you can. She nodded. I will. We walked out separately. In my car, I sat for a long time staring at the check. It represented freedom, security, a future I could finally build without being tethered to someone else's version of who I was allowed to be. And yet there was grief in it, too. Not for the house itself that had been gone for a long time, but for the illusion of a family that could heal without breaking first. I bought a condo closer to the city. Clean lines, light-filled rooms, a place that belonged entirely to me. On the day I moved in, I unpacked a box I'd kept sealed for months and hung one of Dad's preserved fish mounts on the wall. Not because it matched the decor, but because it reminded me where I came from and that I didn't have to erase the past to move forward. Danielle and I didn't speak for a while after the sale. Months passed. Seasons changed. I watched from a distance as she posted photos of the kids at the lake house again, the house quieter now, more respectful. Dad's things slowly reappearing. Mom's quilt folded over a guest bed. Then one evening there was a knock at my door. Danielle stood there holding a long, flat package wrapped in brown paper. I thought you should have this, she said. Inside was another one of Dad's mounts, one she'd told me years earlier had been donated. She admitted she'd hidden it instead, unable to throw it away, but unwilling to face what it represented. I'm sorry, she said. Not just for lying, for thinking control was the same as love. I didn't forgive her that night, but I didn't shut the door either. Rebuilding didn't happen quickly. It happened in small, careful moments. A text, a photo, a conversation that didn't end in accusation. On our mother's birthday, I drove up to the lake house unannounced, walked the property alone, and left a note saying it looked peaceful again. Later that summer, Danielle invited me to a small memorial the kids wanted to hold by the water. They planted a young maple tree and named it after our mother. When they hugged me, something inside me loosened, not healed completely, but softened. Standing on that deck again, watching the sunset reflect off the lake, I understood something I hadn't before. Justice didn't mean destroying what hurt you. It meant refusing to let it keep controlling you. I didn't regret forcing the sale. I didn't regret standing up for myself. Those things were necessary. They broke a lie that had been suffocating us both. But I also didn't regret giving Danielle one last chance to do the right thing, or allowing myself the possibility of a future that wasn't defined solely by anger. The lake house still stands on its 4 acres of waterfront land. Dad's fish are back on the walls. Mom's quilt rests on the couch. A young maple tree grows by the shore. I visit sometimes now, not as an owner, not as a guest, but as family. And that I've learned is something no deed can grant or take away.